Hello lovely people. Yeah, it's a Halloween video. I'm wearing a witch's hat. That's about it. That's all the allusion to Halloween you're going to get. A lot is happening for me at the moment. I keep losing people in my life, and also I have a migraine. That's not new. We work through migraines here, because if we didn't, what would we do with those 22 days of the month? Moving on. Let's make a video, shall we? It's that time of the year where we carve pumpkins. I need to do that. Tell ghost stories and watch horror movies. Absolutely none of which should prompt me to make a whole video about when you look closely at aspects of our society, you begin to notice the deep dark stigma against disabled people and those with visible differences. Right? Wrong. Wrong, my friends. Let's talk about it in a lengthy, chatty YouTube video where I get worked up about things, because why not? I feel really worked up and kind of angry right now, like the Hulk. I'm just always angry. I'm not really. I'm quite a calm person, but I feel angry right now. I have a lot of feelings, kind of about unrelated things, but I can't talk about those. So we're going to talk about this, because this also makes me angry. So we're going to talk about the history of how marginalised groups are stigmatised by the media, and that can uphold shame. And if that sounds like your kind of thing, you should subscribe and stick around. I have other videos. They're less angry, I think I'm just calmer and present it better. So as I was saying, Halloween was filled with lots of fun traditions, but if we were to peel off the mask, like the villain at the end of a Scooby-Doo episode, we'd find some pretty horrific ableism just hiding below the surface. Also like Scooby-Doo. Because Halloween is when many of us enjoy being frightened by things that scare us. Just think about the villains in your favourite movies. Freddy Krueger, Tony Montana, Kylo Ren, the Joker, even Scar in The Lion King, or Shere Khan in the live-action remake of Disney's Jungle Book. What do they all have in common? Yes, they all have facial scarring. And why is that reaction fear? Is it because movies have been priming us to think that way from the very beginning of cinema? Throughout mainstream media, but especially in horror films, disabled and visibly different people are literally vilified. Their bodies are used to shock and disgust audience. So a quick note on language though before we dive in. Now I will be talking about disabled people and people with visible differences in this video, and at times using language like disfigured. There isn't always a consensus throughout marginalised communities about kind of quote unquote right language to use, so I'm going to take my cue from organisations and people with things like facial scars and limb differences who have talked about their own experiences. And disfigured isn't like high up there. I will also be using some of the not great language to describe disabled and visibly different people in the past to add some kind of historical context. That language is not okay to use, but you know, we don't know what not to say unless someone says it. So that's why it's been included. On that note, it's time for some super fun history. Ugly laws! Did you know that there used to be laws to stop disabled people existing in public? No, I'm not exaggerating. And yes, it's pretty much as awful as it sounds. Although they didn't get their nickname until 1975, the Ugly Laws broadly refer to legislation passed by a number of cities in the US in the late 19th century. In their book, The Ugly Laws, Disability in Public, Susan M. Schreck, professor of English and co-director of the Disability Studies program at the University of California, explains that these laws were used as a means of removing poor, unhoused, and disabled people from sight. These laws were literally dehumanizing. The Ugly Code, added to the Chicago City Code in 1881, read, "Any person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed, so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object or an improper person to be allowed in on the streets, highways, thoroughfares, or public places in the city, shall not therein or thereon expose himself or herself to public view." Ooh. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. These laws really describe disabled and visibly different people as objects. The first of the Ugly Laws was passed by the city of San Francisco on the 9th of June 1867. It was Order 783 to prohibit street begging and to restrain certain persons from appearing in streets and public places. Further laws were passed in a number of other states, the last of which was passed in Reno, Nevada in 1905, and the last Ugly Laws weren't repealed until 1974. Yeah, 1974. That is less than 50 years ago. This is not some weird Victorian thing that happened back then. And oh, we never do that now. I never heard of it before. Yeah, the ugly laws banned disabled people from begging for money or food or even selling small items, their main source of income at the turn of the century. Welfare state, where be you? Just by existing as a disabled person in public, you could be seen as making other people feel guilty. So essentially, this is the end result of trickle-down economics. Because if those above you are meant to be taking care of you, then your visual presence begging on the street is a reminder that they aren't. So you're getting arrested for simply existing in a public place, even if you aren't breaking any other laws. According to an article published in the Scandinavian Journal of Disability Research in 2011, the driving force behind the ugly laws was the Charity Organisation Society, an upper-class movement in the latter part of the 19th century. COS set out to eliminate pauperism by scientific organised charity. That was meant to put a stop to begging by detecting fraudulent cases and channeling the benevolent but often misguided acts of charity to cases considered of worthy and deserving. Oh, they're just looking for the good ones. This is very much giving me blonde orphans. Now, the ugly laws were put in place to deny visibly disabled people agency and to protect non-disabled people from having to interact with them. An article published in the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law in 2013 acknowledged that these laws were explicitly designed to deny poor and disabled people not only rights, but dignity and socio-economic mobility. And while these laws no longer exist, the discrimination against disabled and visibly different people hasn't gone away. I mean, we could get into the ways disabled people are still excluded from society today, albeit less through laws and more through inaccessible structures and social stigma. But that's for another video. It's interesting to note that the article Diseased, Maimed, Mutilated, Categorizations of Disability and an Ugly Law in Late 19th Century Chicago, that's a mouthful, which was published in the Journal of Social History in 2010, explains that while the law appears to be a blanket indictment of all physically disabled people, multiple sources indicate that the public expected disabled veterans, workers, and freak show performers to occupy the public realm. They therefore cannot be the intended objects of the ordinance. So basically, disabled people weren't allowed to exist in the same space as the general public, if that would inconvenience abled people. But they were still expected to work if they could, and able people could pay to go and stare at visibly different people for entertainment. Wait, is that the Paralympics calling? Why is the bad guy always disfigured? Don't get me wrong though, even before the ugly laws made it illegal for disabled people to exist in public, our society has always linked morality and appearance. The good guys are handsome and the bad guys have scars, limb differences, or other visible differences. It's a trope in storytelling that's become so ingrained in our society that we don't seem to question why we've accepted that disability can be a shorthand for a character's evilness. I mean, just look at the James Bond franchise. The villains in numerous films have disabilities or facial disfigurements. And while you might hope that we're moving forwards, the latest Bond film, No Time to Die, actually features 3 villains with facial disfigurements. 3 in 2021. And none of them are played by actors with facial scars themselves. Yay for representation! The film's producer, Michael G. Wilson, actually defended this choice. He said it's very much a Fleming device that he uses throughout the stories. The idea that physical deformity and personal deformity goes hand in hand, it's just a motivating factor in their life and what makes them the way they are. Oh, I'm sorry. Are we all just agreeing that everything written in the 1950s is good? Did I miss something? Because I'm pretty sure we all agreed to at least try and leave racism behind. No, disability is still seen as a moral failing, with appearance a way of determining your moral character, both in real life and in books and films. And absolutely no one who has ever encountered fat phobia or appearance-related bullying is in the least bit shocked here, I realise. In an article for Dazed, Michaela Moody says, "We're the villainous subjects of films and costumes, and our disfigurements, disabilities and divergences are shown as weird at best and at worst as punishments to deliver a moral message to the audience." Case in point, what is Colin Farrell's Penguin doing with a big facial scar in the Batman? He's never had one before. The filmmakers worried we wouldn't know who is evil because there's dark vibe going on here. We get that he's evil, we don't need to rely on cinema tropes. It's Batman. These depictions of disabled and visibly different people as villains in horror films and other mainstream media just reinforce the idea that we can and even should judge people based on their appearance. Moody actually coined the term disfigured to describe the erasure of and prejudice against visibly different people. She says that, as a disfigured person, I needed a word like disfigured to describe what happens to people like me socially and institutionally. By the way, I'm going to link to some really good pieces from Michaela Moody down in the description below. Absolutely go follow her. While most people can walk out of the cinema after watching a horror film and just kind of carry on with their day, keeping aside the putting all the lights on and being scared to walk around the house alone, these depictions subconsciously fuel ableism and disfigurement that disabled and visibly different people experience in real life. After the release of No Time to Die, Ryan Phone, a campaigner for UK charity Changing Faces, wrote in an article for iNews that it was humiliating to see a part of my identity being used to provoke disgust and signify brutality. What I had just witnessed on screen and the harassment I was experiencing were connected. Both regarded people like myself as inhuman and undeserving of respect. Aside from disabled and visibly different people rarely getting the chance to see characters who look like them, who aren't the villains, their bodies are also treated as horrifying in and of themselves. At Halloween, we traditionally dress up as things that scare us. Spiders, ghosts, clowns, having to make phone calls. In a post for Face Equity International, Brittany Lee explains that the Halloween is a really difficult time for people with facial differences because people still think it's okay to dress up as us for their Halloween costume. People with facial differences already feel like we are different. We don't also need people wearing our differences as costumes in order to appear scary. There's also just this unnecessary focus on disabled and visibly different people's bodies, and especially on the reveal of scars or limb differences in horror movies for just no other reason but to shock and disgust audiences. It's literally othering, asking audiences to separate themselves, especially burn scars. Like, what is with that? Come on. Another recent example of the unnecessary disfigurement as horror is the recent adaptation of Roald Dahl's The Witches. Probably, it was a couple of years ago, but you probably heard about this one. In the book, the witches are described as having bald heads, clawed hands, blue spit, and square toeless feet. The film, despite being made in 2020, decided to take this further. Not only do the witches have facial scars, but we see Anne Hathaway peeling off her gloves, only to discover that the filmmakers had chosen to show how evil her character is by giving her ectrodactyl, which is defined by the National Organization for Rare Disorders as a condition characterized by absence or malformation of one or more of the fingers or toes. Why? Just why? In the book, I believe they just have very pointed fingers, not an actual disability that exists within the world and people have. It's a pointless addition of disability for the sole purposes of audiences enjoying being disgusted and grossed out to see a depiction of people who don't look like them. You're telling them to be disgusted. Remember how the ugly laws didn't exclude disabled people from spaces where audiences wanted to look at them for entertainment? Just a little casual body horror for your Saturday matinee. Yeah. When The Witches was released, best-selling author Jen Campbell, who, unlike Anne Hathaway, does have ectrodactyl, and also writes really great books, talked about how she loved the book growing up, but she also saw herself as the bad guy in it. In an Instagram post, she said, "As much as I think witches, in other contexts, are pretty badass, I am so exhausted with this representation. I am tired, I am sad, I am extremely glad that I no longer work in a bookshop, as if we lived in non-COVID times, the coming months would be especially hellish." And these depictions only serve to further the idea that disabled and visibly different people are to be feared. In an article for Huffington Post talking about the witches, Catherine Pugh said, "Enough children stare at me and fear me because of my scars and hand, without another movie telling them I'm scary too. I can only imagine what the children and young people with visible differences are feeling when they head back into school, knowing their peers are watching the latest film that shows their scars and differences as evil." When did these children get to see characters with ectrodactyl saving the world? Where are the characters with facial scars who get to fall in love? This shouldn't be the only representation we get. Ba-bum! Hello, main issue. Visibly different people are so rarely visible in mainstream media. Outside of these roles and tropes, the problem is not the existence of disabled and visibly different people on screen. The problem is the highly limited and very harmful representation. Even worse, regardless of whether or not they're the villain, it is rarely disabled and visibly different people themselves who get to portray those characters, further denying them agency. We need to see disabled and visibly different characters in rom-coms, in westerns, in action films, in sci-fi. People deserve to see characters like them on screen, saving the world, falling in love, and having adventures. Until we get representation that doesn't revolve around characters' disabilities and visible differences making them evil, it's pretty hard to change the narrative that people who don't look quote-unquote normal aren't scary and aren't monsters, but are just, people. And honestly, if you need to use a character's physical appearance rather than their actions to show audiences who they should be rooting for in a film, I think you might just be bad at writing. British charity for Changing Faces is working to get filmmakers to reconsider these harmful narratives. Their I Am Not Your Villain campaign calls on the film industry to stop using scars and burns and marks and other visible differences as shorthand for villainy. Their research found that only 1 in 5 people with a visible difference have seen a character who looks like them cast as the hero in a film or on TV. Even fewer, at 15%, have seen someone with a visible difference playing the love interest on screen. But nearly double, at 39%, have seen someone with a visible difference cast as the villain or baddie. Again, it is the ableism and disfigurement that these films, particularly horror ones, that is shocking and awful, not the inclusion of disabled or visibly different people themselves. Obviously, we want disabled and visibly different people to be included, just not only ever as the villain. As a Galdem article puts clearly, while there are a number of ways that society makes life difficult and actively dangerous for disabled people, fundamentally, there is nothing horrifying about having a disability, and we should rightly call out and reject anything that so much as subtly reinforces that idea. Putting out the harm these depictions have isn't about being a killjoy or telling people that they can't watch or like these films. In an article about No Time to Die, Jen Campbell says, "This is not a call for a boycott of James Bond. No, this is a request for better storytelling, as well as more positive representation of disability and disfigurement, not just in Bond, but more widely across literature and film." That feels like a pretty reasonable ask, right? Halloween is supposed to be fun, but stigmatizing marginalized groups isn't fun. Unless it's vampires. Stigmatize them. They absolutely know what they did. Turning people's disabilities, facial scars, limb differences, and other visible differences into Halloween costumes just serves to other disabled and visibly different people, who, despite what mainstream media would have you think, actually exist all year round. Yeah. So let's mix it up. Do you have any recommendations for portrayals of visibly different characters who aren't villains, either in horror movies or in other media? Share in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed watching this more analytical type of video. It's sort of part of the Media Tropes series I have going. You can find the whole playlist by clicking the card up here or the link down in the description. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I know that half of the people who continue to watch videos on my channel haven't yet subscribed, so if that's you, make sure you have actually subscribed before, whoops, the YouTube algorithm kind of takes you somewhere else and then you forgot where you were and you can't find your way back, because that happens to me all the time and I hate it. I do hate it more on Instagram because I find it much harder to find my way back on Instagram than I do on YouTube. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jessica Out of the Closet. Finally, a special thank you to my clubbies for their continued support of this channel and for making videos like this with harder topics possible. The Kellgren-Fozard Club is a membership club right here on my YouTube channel that includes special perks like a shout out in your birthday month and an exclusive behind the scenes monthly video. Your comments rise to the top and you get my face after your name, wearing a succession of adorable crowns. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye bye!